Hi, everyone. I'm Johnny Mahlangу from Johannesburg, and it is my pleasure for me to talk to you today about monitoring safety in clinical trials. The agenda for today is relatively short. I will, first of all, put safety in the context of drug development, and I'll try and allude to who's responsible for safety in clinical trials and what are the safety responsibilities of those individuals who are responsible for safety. Just to remind you that safety evaluation is central to all stages of drug development life cycle. It is certainly something that is kept in mind during the innovation and drug discovery phase. It is important in the preclinical phase when the drug is tested in vivo, in vitro, as well as ex vivo. Perhaps the most important part of safety is when the drug gets given to human beings, and that is during the clinical development phase. And I'll speak to the clinical development phase a bit more later. And the last phase is the post-marketing, where the drug is probably further evaluated for safety. If one looks at the safety in the clinical development phase, as you will recall, that there are a number of phases during the clinical development of the drug. We call them phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And in fact, you can see that the kind of activities that are involved in each of these phases are many. The most important part is that each one of these phases has got safety aspect. Safety evaluation in it. When one is looking at the phase 1, there is safety evaluation that takes place. When it's looking at phase 2, there is safety evaluation, and this is usually in the context of patients with the relevant disease. And of course, the phase 3 is important. In addition to the efficacy evaluation, there is also safety evaluation. Safety evaluation goes beyond the licensing and approval of the drug. It certainly involves the post-marketing phase, where in some instances, in fact, the regulatory authorities may require submission of additional safety data as part of the approval. And of course, the most important question is, who's responsible for the safety of the drugs that are undergoing clinical trials? There are many role players. I've oversimplified the important role players here. And in my mind, the most important one is probably the sponsor of the drug, who's responsible, of course, for a large proportion of the safety aspect of their drug. And then, of course, we've got the investigator. These are individuals that interface between the sponsor and the trial participants. The regulatory authorities, including, of course, the government regulatory authorities, as well as the ethics committees, are also having a huge responsibility. And last but not least, the patients themselves actually are responsible for the safety. The question, of course, is what are these responsibilities? If one looks at the sponsor safety responsibilities, you can see that there are many. And I've listed a few here, which I think are very important. The sponsor is responsible for formulating a safety and monitoring and evaluation plan. They collect and categorize and review all of the adverse events during the conduct of the study. They appoint an independent monitoring committee that is going to review the safety data. They ensure that the participants have got insurance cover. They monitor compliance with the guidance that has been provided by the regulators and the ethics committees. And of course, the most important responsibility is to stop the exposure to the drug if the adverse event is serious and related to the drug itself. Moving on to the safety responsibilities of the investigator, these are many. They are nicely outlined in the Good Clinical Practice Guideline, but I've listed a few here. They monitor participant adverse events, report these adverse events to the sponsors and the ethics committees and the regulatory authorities. And of course, some of these adverse events may be classified as serious adverse events, in which case these need to be reported within 24 hours of the investigator knowing about them. They evaluate the adverse events in relation to the drugs, and of course, they stop the exposure if it is found that, in fact, the serious adverse event is related to the exposure to the drug. What are the responsibilities of the regulators? These are many as well. They ensure that the investigator and the sponsor comply with the safety monitoring, evaluation, and reporting plan. They evaluate all the safety data that is collected during the study, and they assess the risk-benefit ratio. And in fact, if the risk far outweigh the benefit, they stop the study in the majority of instances. And finally, the role of the participants in the safety monitoring and evaluation, their responsibility is to make sure that the events that happen whilst they were taking the drug are reported to the investigators, and these events, in fact, are catalogued and they are actually being acted upon. They are also responsible for availing themselves to assist the investigator in further evaluation of the relationship between the adverse events and the study drug. And of course, they should stop taking the drug if instructed to do so. These are some of the responsibilities that one may well assign to each of the important role players in monitoring and evaluating safety during the clinical trial. And of course, this is only during the clinical trial. We do know that data is generated outside clinical trials in the form of real-world evidence that some investigators may well undertake, and of course in the form of registries. That is all I wanted to share with you, and thank you very much for your attention.